Welcome, everybody, to Customizing Your Chat Device Part 1. It is the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Courtney Mayholtz. I am the Assistive Technology Consultant here in the state of Georgia. I have been with Saltillo, PRC Saltillo, for the last 3 years now, and I work with the Saltillo brand. I am a speech language pathologist. I've been a speech language pathologist for a little over 11 years now, and I've worked in a variety of different settings. I started in my career in rehabilitation and acute care, working with adults. I've also worked in the private practice setting with pediatric and adult patients, as well as working in the school with both elementary and middle school, high schoolers, and even kids a bit older. So I have a wide variety of experience, and I hope to bring some of that background and knowledge to the training today. I've worked with AAC in many of those settings that I mentioned as well, so AAC has been a passion of mine for a long, long time. So, on the agenda today, we are going to be talking about primarily two ways that we customize our devices: how we customize the settings on the device, and then how we customize the vocabulary itself. And you can see all of the different things we're going to cover in today's training. As we go through the training today, we are going to take this ready, aim, fire approach. Um, this approach is a proven technique, a proven strategy. It's a business strategy primarily, but what it primarily is talking about is that we want to have a plan or an idea of what we want to change in order to make sure that we are hitting the target, right? So on our devices, there are tons and tons of features and things that we can change. But if we don't have a plan for what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to achieve, our device might end up looking something like this dartboard here, where we've thrown all these darts, we've changed all these settings, but we're not really changing things to get to that bullseye, to really make it do what we need it to do. So anytime you see this little guy here with the dart and the arrow, that's going to be a slide where we're talking about the different settings, and we might be providing some meaningful and functional ways or reasons that we would change a setting on the device. So it's going to be just a nice little reminder as we go through. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about some of the buttons and things that you might be seeing on your device. This is where we have the greatest variety in our devices because the NovaChats are built on a Samsung tablet, so we are really don't have the ability to change what they put on their tablet. So if you see these buttons, now you know what they will do in their various functions. So if your device has a magnifying glass, that button functions to stop speech. And if you press and hold, it will reconnect your Bluetooth amplifier. This is primarily in older devices, so if you don't see this on your device, don't worry, you're not missing anything. There are ways to do both of those functions, and we can talk about that. The back arrow may look like either a triangle or I call it a U-turn arrow, and that will function to take you back to the previous menu. I'm going to quickly show you on my device that my device has that back arrow. So you can see here that there is my U-turn, right? And it does take me back a page. Okay, so if I push that button. My device, the home button, is this actual button here in the middle. Okay, that if I push it, it has a couple functions. It will wake up my screen. And then if I have some settings set, it will also let me come out of the chat software. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. Underneath the actual button on my screen is going to be what we call our menu button, which mine looks like two pieces of paper. So you can see that there. Some people, it looks that two pieces of paper is the recent apps button, which is very similar to how our phones work, where you tap that and it will show you all the open apps on your device and you'll be able to close things that you don't want. Your menu button may also look like 3 lines, 3 dots. It might look like a piece of paper with 2 lines of writing on it. Again, this is the widest variety, but take a minute to get familiar with your device and the various buttons that you have on it if you are not already familiar. Let's talk about the chat menu. So when I push that menu button, you can see that my menu looks initially very different from all of the features that you have available to you. And we'll talk about how we can go about changing that menu. The first thing you're going to see, though, is edit mode. That is primarily where exactly what it sounds like. You're going to turn editing on and off to be able to change any of the vocabulary buttons that appear on the screen. Settings is where we're going to start out today. We'll spend a good bit of time there talking about how we modify the device itself. So settings includes how we activate the device, how the device sounds, how it looks, how it responds to our touch or our activation. Library is going to be where you're going to get the list of all the vocabulary files available to you. And again, we'll talk more about that in a later slide. Help is where you can find your information about your system and the registration and what features you have available. It's also going to be the place where you can check for updates and update your device to the newest system settings or the newest version. You can see on my slide there are 2 additional features, Word Finder and Menu Lock, which are not currently enabled on my menu, but we are going to enable them as we go through the training today, so you will be able to do that. All right, let's jump right into customizing. We're going to start by going into the settings. So you can see step 1 on that slide is to push the menu button. So if we're starting from scratch, I'm going to push menu. I will then go to settings, and that brings me to this pop-up menu. This is my main menu for the settings page. The very first option that we have listed on that settings menu is going to be input settings. These, so if I go to input settings, you can see that there are lots of different settings about the button settings, speech display bar. I want to spend a bit of time right now talking about the timing. You can see that in our timing, there are 3 different options. Okay, so there is acceptance time, release time, and activate on release. We'll talk a little bit about what each of these mean and why we might, what the benefits are of some of them versus others. So acceptance time, what acceptance time does, if I go into that menu, it's going to, I want to go in and enable it. And then if I needed to change the time, I could then do so. So acceptance time right now is set at 1 second. I want to go ahead and show you what acceptance time does on the device and how I touch it. Acceptance time means that before I can register, before the device registers that I've pushed a button, I have to push and hold that button for 1 full second before it will activate or do what it's supposed to. So, for example, if I touch eat, nothing happens because I didn't hold that button for a full second. Still didn't hold it for a full second. So, eat. Once I hold it for 1 second, it then accepts and recognizes that I have pushed a button. I've made something happen. So that's what acceptance time does. Now, let's go back to those settings. Input, timing. I'm going to go back into acceptance. I'm going to turn this one off because I see some people use it as a way to prevent kids from doing something like this, where it's going to take, the reason it's not doing that is because I have my release time. So from doing something like this, and then it says it multiple times. I'm going to make it stop talking by pushing that X up there in the corner. So some people like to turn on that acceptance time for that reason. But I always caution teams about how would you feel if you had to wait 1 full second before every single word you said. That can be really frustrating for some kids to have that acceptance time turned on, and it can slow down their communication and how fast they're able to communicate what they want. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be used. Acceptance time can be really useful for some kids that have some maybe fine motor difficulties where maybe they just need the ability to push it a little bit longer, or they need that feedback where they can push on the screen a little bit longer. So acceptance time can be used in that way. But if you're primarily using it as a way to avoid that maybe self-stimulatory behavior of hearing a word over and over and over again, what I recommend to most teams by far is release time. So a release time was the one that I initially had turned on. And I find that the sweet spot for the teams that I work with is anywhere between half a second. So if I wanted to decrease this, and 1 full second. So I generally leave it at like 0.7. And what release time does is release time will accept my first push, but then it makes me wait that 0.7 seconds before I can push any other button. It's kind of like a buffer. So you'll see I can say eat, but I can't say eat, 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 eat. But if I'm using my device functionally, by the time I get to goldfish, I've met that 0.7 seconds. So let me show you again. If we go home, and I'm going to clear, and I say eat goldfish, I'm still pretty quick and accurate, and I don't have to wait that certain amount of time or push and hold that button. But by the time I get to the next word I want, if I've set my release time correctly, then I don't have any barriers to communication. Okay. So let's go home. I'm going to clear that again. The last button timing that we'll talk about, so if I go back to my menu, settings, input, and timing, is activate on release. Now you can see that I have mine turned on. I generally turn that on by default on most of my devices. And what that does is, and this can be really great for some kids who have fine motor issues, if they're maybe trying to get to good, but they accidentally hit the screen on and nothing happens until I release my finger. So that's activate on release. If I didn't have activate on release turned on, when I hit that and, it's going to activate immediately. So activate on release can be good if I need to drag my finger across the screen to get to the word that I want. More. Let me show you just quickly what it looks like if we have that turned off. So if I turn off activate on release, what happens is if I'm going for good, but I miss hit, it's going to say and then it doesn't say my good. So again, I always leave activate on release on, just a great way to make sure that we are saying those right buttons that we intend. Okay, let's talk about beep on button press as the next option that you would want to consider turning on or off, the next setting. So menu, settings, and input. Some kids or users, not just children, need a little bit more input when they're using the devices. So what you can do, and to help them understand they're pushing buttons, what you can do is you can turn on the beep on button press. So if I'm in that input menu, I'm going to go to beep on button press, and then I'm just going to check to enable it. Go back to my vocabulary, and you'll hear it mostly on the buttons that don't talk. Let me turn my volume up just as much as it will go, since it is quite soft. But you'll hear when I push this clear button that the device is going to make a little beep sound so that I know something happened. Okay. It's harder to hear when you are pushing a button that talks. So if I push this go button, go. It's really hard to hear that beep. And in fact, you probably couldn't hear it at all because the voice was so loud over it. But so it can help for some of those buttons that don't talk. It can be a really good to let your clients know that they are pushing the buttons and something is happening. The other way that you can assist in giving some feedback to the user. So the beep on button press gives that auditory feedback. We can also give some visual feedback. If I go into menu, settings, and input, this button press draw. So if I pull up that menu, right now I have it set to normal. And what I want to do is I then want to go back one menu. I'm going to go to style and I want to disable my gradient fill. What this does is now this is going to give me some visual feedback so that when I push a button, it's going to turn red to let me know that something's happening. Okay, and then combined with that beep on button press, I get the audio feedback and then the visual feedback as well. Let me turn this down just a bit so I don't
put.
Okay, so it's turning red as I push those buttons. And that for most users is enough feedback. You might have noticed that on that button press draw, there is something called visual effects. I would recommend if you want more information about the various visual effects and what you could do, such as magnifying buttons, creating like overlays or inverting the colors, reach out to your local consultant and they can tell you a little bit more about why you might use some of those features. But for the majority of clients, like I said, we leave it on normal and we go into that style and disable the gradient fill to help give some visual feedback. Okay, tilt. Let me go back to my input menu. This is another one of those settings that I change for most of my devices, where I go into the tilt and I set the action to be no action. The reason for that is that the device really is designed, the buttons are designed to be in this landscape orientation. So it really is the best way to do that. And it should automatically, when you set that no action, the preferred orientation should be landscape. All right, let's talk about speech output. So I'm going to go back one menu. And you'll see, if we go into speech output, that there are several different options about how you want the device to speak. So there is speak after every character, speak after every word, and sentence. Now those are pretty self-explanatory. So character is going to speak after every letter I type, word is going to speak after every word, and then sentence is going to be if I use any grammar. It will tell me what I'm saying. So let me demonstrate each of those. Okay, so I'm going to clear that. So because I have it set to character, if I were to go into my keyboard and type out a word,
D O G,
it says each word as I type it. Then if I hit my space button,
dog,
it's going to say the word because I have it set to speak after every word. If I didn't type in that word, and we saw this earlier, if I just push any of these buttons that are supposed to say a word, it's going to say that word for me automatically.
put, in.
Okay, so it's set to speak after every word. And then finally, I can, if I were to use that grammar,
Put in.
now it says my whole sentence for me. So you can turn those features on and off as you like if you didn't want it to speak after every letter. Although I certainly would say it doesn't hurt, especially some of the research coming out now about how we should be really focusing on literacy from the very beginning. My opinion would be that for most kids, it doesn't hurt. But again, you have to decide whether or not you need to turn that off based on your clients individually. Okay. Let's talk about the voice. Okay. And again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type those in to the chat window. before we go to the voice, let's talk quickly about, go to the previous slide, apologies, about, went too far, about your auto clear options. So in one of our recent updates, we gave you a few auto clear options. You now have the option to turn auto clear off immediately or after next activation. What the auto clear off does is that you have to, in order to get rid of any message in the speech display bar, you're going to have to touch the clear button
Help.
or
Me.
this X button. So you saw me earlier touch the X to make the device stop talking when I had a lot of words on there, but also if I push and hold, that will clear my screen for me. So if I have my auto clear set to off, I physically have to go in and clear that message somehow. If I set it to immediate, what will happen is if I type in a sentence,
Help. Me. Help me.
you see how when I put in that grammar, it went in and erased my message.
Help. Me.
The same thing
Help me.
will happen if I touch that speech display bar. So once I make it speak that whole message, it's immediately going to erase the message. What most of my teams have their devices set to is, instead of off or that immediate, is this after next activation. Because what the after next activation does is
Help. Me. Help me.
it will stay in the speech display bar until I touch another button.
I.
Okay, so once I touch that button, then it would switch. And so that's really nice if a child says something and somebody says, "What did you say?" They can push that button again and make it talk again. And the message, or they could walk over and look what was written in the speech display bar. So the message doesn't immediately disappear. Okay, let's talk about the voices. So menu, settings, speech output, and I'm going to go to voice now. There are two different synthesizers, so I want to talk about those first. You have Ivona is the standard synthesizer that comes on all of our devices, and that is going to include, I believe it's 8 or 9 US English voices. A couple of them are child voices. There's at least one child female and one child male voice. But acapella is an additional purchase. So if you don't see acapella on your device, it's not that you're missing out on it. It's maybe the SLP who recommended the device didn't think that it was necessary, or the insurance doesn't pay for it. There could be lots of reasons for it. But acapella is an additional purchase. So if we go into Ivona, I'm then going to go into my voice settings, and you'll see that I can select from a list, if I pull down this little drop-down box, of all the different voices that are available to me. And you can tell, so they're listed by their country. So these are British voices. These are going to be the US voices, and it tells you whether or not they're, adult male, child male, adult female, etc. So I have Sally selected on mine, and if I wanted to, I could test.
Hello, my name is Sally, a teen female English voice from Ivona.
And if I needed to, I can change the rate of speech. So I can speed it up or I can slow it down with Ivona, and this will change how the voice sounds.
Hello, my name is Sally, a teen female English voice from Ivona.
I'm going to reset to the defaults. I'm just going to go ahead and save. I do just want to highlight that with acapella, you are able to independently change the pitch and the rate of the speech. So you do have a few more options for greater personalization with the acapella synthesizer. All right, still under that voice menu, let's talk about pronunciations and how we get the device to say certain words. With these computerized voices, these synthesized voices, sometimes they say things funny, or like my name is the perfect example. So it will always pronounce my last name Mayholtz because that's what it looks like, M-A-H, but my last name is really pronounced Mayholtz. So what I can do is I can go into my pronunciations and I can tell it the word that I want it to say, and then I can play with how I want it to say it. So to add a new pronunciation, when you go into that pronunciations menu, we're going to hit menu again. So over here on the corner, I'm going to press new, and then I'm going to spell the word as it is. So I spell my last name, Mayholtz, in that first box. And then in that second box, you're going to spell it how you want it to sound. So I want my name to sound like May Holtz. And then I can pronounce it.
Mayholtz.
And I can play around with the sound. If I wasn't happy with that, I could go in and change that around again until I got it exactly how I wanted it to sound. And then I'm going to hit save. So now you can see that that pronunciation I have added in my window. So anytime the device sees that word, my last name, it's going to pronounce it correctly, or the way I've told it to. Okay, let's talk about some of our style settings. So I'm going to go into back to my main menu there where input's my first one. I'm going to go down here to style. And style really changes how the device looks. So the first thing we'll talk about is the font size. So if I go into font, and this is all changing my speech display bar. So you see here that these options are for my speech display bar. So if I'm going to change my font, and I want to change the font size. Now the default on the devices is 12, which makes that speech display bar. So you can see I can either go up and down with the arrows, or I can type in the number I want. That makes my speech display bar up here at the top very teeny tiny and hard to see. So one of the things that I do for most of my devices and clients that I work with is that I go in and I change that font size to at least 20, 22, sometimes you saw it was in 24 initially. But that can be a really great way to make your key guard line up. If you're using a key guard for your device, that's what you're going to have to do. And in fact, our new key guards on the back of them have etched in what the font size needs to be in order to make those buttons line up. Okay. You can also make it bold or italicized. Personal preference is that I like to have my words appear in bold. It just makes them stand out a bit more. And then you can also change the font that you wanted to, okay, if you wanted to. I have some adolescent clients that really enjoy playing around with that from time to time and personalizing their device. You can also, I went back one too far. Let's go back to style. On that speech display bar, we can change the background color and the font color. So you can see right now that my background color is white. If I wanted to, I could change that to black. Now right now, because my font and my background color are the same, it's giving me this pop-up that, hey, they're the same color, you're not going to be able to see anything. So it's a nice little warning. But if I wanted to, I could then change my font to yellow. And so I have worked with some teams to change things like this when there are some visual needs. Maybe they need high contrast. And so we change it to yellow or white or whatever colors work best for that client. So you can create some good contrast there if you need it. And go back into settings and style. I'm just going to quickly change that back. Okay. One of the other things that you can do is show the icons in your speech display bar. Before I get to this slide, let me talk one more about this speech display icons. If I check that, I go back, now you can see that that icon that's on my button is also appearing in my speech display bar. Some teams like to use this as a way to help give that feedback that I mentioned, right, when we were talking about the buttons turning red. Some teams I know have used it as a way to, one client was hard of hearing, almost deaf, and so he was non-signing. So he would communicate on the device, and then the team was also using the device to talk to him using those symbols so that he could understand what they were saying because their communication and hearing was limited. I do caution teams who are using the button icons to try and improve literacy skills. What the research tells us is that that is not true, right? With icons, with sight words does not help support literacy. In fact, it's distracting. So if that's the only reason that you're using the icons in the speech display bar, I would recommend probably not using it for that reason. So I'm going to go back to my settings and style. Let me turn those off quickly. I did also want to talk about this show button images. If I turn, by default, that's turned on, where all of those pictures are on my buttons. But if I turn them off, you can see now I just have the words available. So this can be useful for some people who have literacy skills and maybe don't want to see those pictures. I have had some feedback from adult users who feel like with the pictures turned on, it feels too childish for them or juvenile, and so they prefer just to have the words if they have those literacy skills. And turn them back on. So settings, style, and show my button images. Oh, I was ahead of myself on the slide. So we already talked about the SDB icons and why we might or might not choose to use them, right? So if literacy is the only thing you're trying to achieve, research tells us that you are likely actually doing the opposite and sort of limiting those skills. Let's talk about menu lock. Menu lock is a great feature that I recommend. It's another one of those things that I say we need to turn it on for almost every single device because kids are just so great at figuring out technology and getting into settings and changing things. And if we have done our homework and really thought about the settings that we're changing and why we want them to be there, we don't want anybody getting in and changing those. Menu lock is the way to do that. So when you go to menu lock, you're going to enable it. And if you're doing that for the first time, you will automatically be prompted to set up a password. So you can see that I had a password previously on here. But if I wanted to go in and change it, I could put in whatever my old password was, and then I would set up my new password. So my old password was 1234. I'm just going to make my new password the same thing, 1234, 1234. It doesn't have to have any special characters. It doesn't have to be a certain length or number of letters. It really can be anything you want. Just make sure it's something that you're going to remember and something that your user, if you don't want them to have access to the menu and the settings, something that they are not going to be able to guess. Okay, so then when I come out of my settings menu, when I go back to that menu, now I can see on the very right-hand side is the lock. When I push lock, that menu goes away and nothing appears to happen. But really what's happened is if I would have pushed that menu again, I can see now I have locked all those options on that menu bar. And the only way to get back into them is to go in and unlock. When I get to that screen, I'm prompted to put in my password, so 1234. And if I don't remember my password, this little guy pops up. He says, don't forget about Bosco. So Bosco in all caps will reset your password. Okay, that is your override. If you forget it, you're going to put in Bosco, and it's going to turn off your menu lock, and you'll be good to go. You'll be able to go in and reset a new password. But if I remember my password, I'm going to type it in. I hit OK. I get this password or this pop-up, excuse me, that says disable kiosk. For right now, I'm going to say no. And we'll talk about what kiosk mode is in a few slides. But for right now, I just want to unlock my menu, so I don't want to unlock kiosk mode as well. All right, let's talk about Word Finder. If I go to Menu and Settings, Word Finder, To have it pop up on my menu, I'm going to make sure that I enable it to show the menu item. And then it will appear on that menu. So if I go to menu, there's Word Finder. Now, Word Finder is a great feature, especially if you're just getting started. So if I'm looking for the word pirate, I can type in the word that I'm looking for, and it's going to show me that I have to go to people, jobs, and then there's the word pirate. So people, jobs, and there's my pirate. Now, I do want to show you the other way to get to Word Finder, and that's going to be through the keyboard. So if you have your menu locked and you don't want to go in and unlock it and put in that password, what you would do is you would go to your keyboard, you would type in the word
F-A-S-T.
and then you're going to push that Find Word button. The majority of the vocabularies have it available, and it's going to tell you the pathways, the buttons you need to push in order to get to that word. Now, one little caveat. You can see it's telling me to go to colors, and then describe, but describe is on my homepage, so I'm just going to go to describe first, and then there's my word fast. Also, you can see that on my word finder how it flipped between the pathways that were available, and it was up, each pathway was up there for a pretty long time, and I did that by going into my settings and word finder, and I set the flip interval. So I think the default is 3 seconds. I have mine set at 7. You could make it even longer. I believe the highest is, oh, I thought it was 10, but you can see it goes quite high for the number of seconds that you need. But just to remember what the buttons are that you need to push, you can change that flip interval. And then that way you don't have to unlock the menu every time you're trying to find a word. You can search for it in the keyboard. So there's that flip interval, and that will show you again in that speech display bar. If there's only one pathway, it will just show you that one pathway for the full time. Okay, let's talk about kiosk mode. So kiosk mode, if you remember when we were talking about the menu lock, we got that little pop-up asking if we wanted to disable kiosk mode. Now, just a disclaimer, some devices that don't have, some of our older devices do not have kiosk mode, but most of the newer devices do. So if your device is an 8.25, which came out, I want to say now more than 3 or 4 years ago, then so if you have an 8.25 or newer, then you're going to have kiosk mode. But if you have an older device like an 8.1 or then you probably won't have kiosk mode. But what kiosk mode allows you to do is it allows you to come out of the chat software, so this vocabulary, and get into the Android side of things. And the reason I tell my teams that we want to do that is because we want to set the device up connected to Wi-Fi so that it can download the updates over Wi-Fi. That's the easiest way to do it. So to come out of kiosk mode, you go to menu and settings, then we're going to go to system and then kiosk mode. So if I disable it, when I push this home button, so the actual button on my screen, now I come out. Now, my device is a non-dedicated system, what we call an integrated system, and that means that I have access to the internet and the Play Store. But on a dedicated device, you will not have access to the apps. You will just see your settings and the chat software and like the gallery, so that you can go into your settings. Okay, you would go into settings and you would turn on the Wi-Fi, and then you would connect it to your Wi-Fi at home. When I go back into the chat software, it takes me right back to that kiosk mode screen. Okay, so I could turn it back on if I wanted to. If I want to require a password and have a separate password from that word finder, I would first click require password, and I'm prompted to set up that password. So I'm going to do 5678. and then I'm going to hit save. So now my password is required. And then if I turn kiosk mode on again, before I can come out of kiosk, I'm going to have to put in that password. Now I do also get this prompt, do I want to lock the menu too? Right now I'm going to say no because I'm still making some changes, so I don't want it locked right now. If I did forget my password for kiosk mode that I set, you can see here on the slide, the override password is Bazinga. All right, let's go back to the settings menu, the main menu there, and let's talk a little bit about data logging, what it is. Data logging records which buttons are pressed, when they are pressed, and what, if anything, is said on the device. So it collects information about all of the things that are happening on the device, and they're time stamped. And then there's lots of ways, either using realized language or you can save data to file to analyze that data. And it's a really great tool to be able to look at, again, what's happening on the device and analyze that so that you can plan your goals in the future. What do we need to work on now? Or what are we doing really great at and how can we improve? There isn't a recorded training on our website that you can watch. There is also going to be a live version where you can also get ASHA credit if you wanted a little bit more information about data logging and all of the great features. Okay, a couple more settings that I want to talk about under that system. I did just want to mention these, that if I go into display settings, my brightness, you can see I have my brightness set pretty low so that you can see my screen on the camera here. But you can either set the automatic brightness, and that's using the sensor, I believe it's up here somewhere around the camera, and it will change the brightness as needed. Or if you're in sunlight, bright sunlight outside, you do want to set that brightness all the way up so that you're able to see the screen in the sunlight. The other thing that I change pretty much for every device is the screen timeout. So by default, the devices come with the screen timeout set at 2 minutes. I go in and set it to, based on what the team tells me, either 10 minutes or 30 minutes. 2 minutes is really just not enough time. You would constantly be waking up your device after when you're trying to say something. But most teams I find either set it for 10 minutes or 30 minutes, and that's enough time for them to functionally be communicating. If you haven't said anything after 10 minutes, then it's not such a big deal to go in and hit that wake up button. Okay. Let's talk about customizing vocabulary with the last 10 minutes or so. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you customize a vocabulary is select your vocabulary. There are over 30 vocabulary files available on all of our devices. So if I go into Menu and Library, that gets you to this screen. And you may see on your device some of the vocabularies listed twice. So for basic PCS, for basic SS. The only way that these vocabularies differ are the symbol set that is used. Symbol sticks are the standard default symbols that are available on all of our devices. PCS symbols are board maker symbols. And again, based on insurance or regulations, you might not have access to the PCS symbols, or in this case, some kids don't use board maker symbols, so it's not a necessary feature on the device, so it wasn't recommended. So you're not missing anything, it just means that it wasn't necessarily needed. But again, there's no differences between those two files, it's just the pictures that are on the buttons. The devices do appear in alphabetical, the vocabularies, excuse me, do appear in alphabetical order. And you can see that anything with a lock next to it is an original vocabulary file that comes on the device. So again, there's over 30. All of these are original files. Now we're getting down to the word power files, where are probably our most popular files because they are based on core words. But before you can make any changes to a vocabulary, you do have to copy it. Okay, so I'm going to select this Word Power 60 Basic, and I get the options of open or duplicate. I want to duplicate it, and then I'm going to change the name to my name, Courtney. I recommend that you keep this first part, Word Power 60 Basic, just because if you ever were to call tech support and they say, well, what file are you using? If you had just named it Courtney or somebody's initials or somebody's first name, you might not remember necessarily that it was the Word Power 60 Basic file. So once you have your name, you're going saved, you're going to save that, and you will see then that it appears in your list and it's unlocked. Okay, so the locked versions are there as the default. If something happens, you always have a way to get back to the originals. But I'm going to go ahead and open that Courtney file that is unlocked so we can talk about editing a button. When you edit a button, you push your menu and you go into edit mode. Okay, so I'm going to touch anywhere on the screen to get rid of that pop-up menu. When you're in edit mode, you will see these red words at the bottom of the screen. It tells you you're in edit mode. It tells you the name of the vocabulary file you're changing, you're editing. And then after the colon, here in the brackets is the name of the page that you're editing. That's going to be important tomorrow when we talk about editing pages and connecting and navigating and things like that. So that's where you'll find that information. But the reason those red words pop up is sort of just as like a warning, like, hey, you're still in edit mode. You're still able to change some things. So to change a button, you navigate to the button you want to change. So let's go to social, and we're going to change and personal. We're going to change that My Name button. So I'm going to push and hold, and you'll see that you get a pop-up menu where my very first choice is Edit Button. Okay, and you have a couple things on that edit menu. So the label are the words that are on the button here. The message is what the device says. Okay, so here's my label, and then this is what my button is going to say. When I'm creating a new button, whatever I put into the label is going to pre-populate into the message, but you're going to see that I can go into the message and I can change that separately. So my name is Courtney. I always like to model the grammar. Again, just a personal choice, but I include that punctuation. So I've changed my message. Okay, I don't need to change my label. It's fine. It doesn't need to say the whole sentence. I just want that button to say my name. Now I want to change the picture. Now I can import an image. We're going to talk about how we import images tomorrow. Because that can be really great sometimes. But for the majority of cases, you're either going to use the camera. Now there's a front-facing and a rear-facing camera. So right now you're looking up at my ceiling and my microphone, or I could flip the camera around and you would be looking at my desk, and here's my hand under the desk. Okay, so you can use the camera in a pinch to take pictures of your favorite toys, favorite options. And when you take a picture, it saves it to the gallery. And then that image will appear on the button. Or you could use the symbol library. And you're going to use that find feature. And if I was looking for a picture of a woman, I type that in and hit search. And all of the available pictures that I have in my library are going to show up. So if I wanted to click that one, now I can see that picture is on my button. All right, let's talk about style. So style changes how the button looks. So similar to how the style settings in our menu changed, how our speech display bar looked and all of that, style really refers to the looks. I can change the font here that's on my button. I can change the size over here. I could make it bold, italic, or underlined. I can change the color of a couple different things. So the body is going to be the background color of my button. Okay, The font is going to change my font color, pretty self-explanatory there. And then the border is going to change the outline. So this is sometimes nice to be able to go in and change that and make your border larger, because then it gives another visual, it highlights the button, right? And so then when I save it, that button looks different from all of the other buttons on my screen. So if you're focusing on just a few words for the week, you could go in and you could highlight those buttons and really make them stand out. We'll talk more about the Actions tab tomorrow. Most of the devices have this speech message as the action programmed onto them. What that means is that whatever's in this message window, the device is going to say that, and it's going to put it in that speech display bar at the top. And again, we'll talk about some of the different things that you can do with button actions tomorrow. If I'm satisfied, I've made all my changes to my button, I'm going to hit save. Okay, and so now I see that that button looks pretty different from the rest of them. And I've made all those changes. And if I push it,
my name is Courtney.
It says my name is Courtney. Okay, so if I wanted to, a couple other things I could do with editing. I can copy and paste an entire button. Okay, so if I wanted to, I would go to that menu. I'm going to copy my button, and then I could paste it onto another page. In this case, I'm just going to paste it over here. Now I have those two my name buttons. I can, if I want this button to look, like this one, I can copy the button style. So I'm going to copy button, and instead of pasting, what I do is I paste just the button style. So it's going to take any of those settings that were in the style menu, and it's going to paste those to that button. That can be a really great way that, like, if I've highlighted buttons, once I'm done working on that button, and I want it to look like the other ones, I'm going to copy the button I want it to look like, and then I'm just going to paste that button style. Okay, so now it looks like all those other buttons. I can move buttons across the screen just by dragging and dropping them, and you see that when you drag it, that red outline appears to show you where that button is going to go. You can change the button size if you needed to change some buttons. If I push and hold, change button size, I can change the number of cells, horizontally and vertically, if I needed that button to appear bigger for whatever reason. One of the other things I really like is the use the same button. So use same button can be really great where if you wanted a button on multiple pages. So for example, if we wanted this, I am blank years old, right? We wanted this button to be on a couple pages, maybe this page, and then also my school page. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to copy this button. I'm going to go to home and go to my school page, my calendar page. Maybe we talk about our ages on this page, and then I'm going to hit use same button. So now I can see that that button that I just changed, right? I went in and put that I was 29, is on this screen.
I am 29 years old.
But let's say my birthday was yesterday and now I need to change that. I can go in and I can change this button on one of the pages, and it's going to appear on both pages.
I am 30 years old.
So now I'm 30. But if I go to social and my personal and questions,
I am 30 years old.
So it makes the changes to both buttons because we're using the same buttons on all of the pages. If you change this, got a question. If you change the skin tone settings for all buttons, is there a way to modify individual buttons to be other skin tones? No, that's a great question. There is not a way to change individual buttons. Well, I take that back. There is a way to do that, just not in the settings. Okay, so what you would do, and the skin tones is only available. Nope, it is available in both symbol sets. Apologize, misspoke there. So what you would do, and that's great because I didn't talk about it, under style, if you wanted to change that skin tone, you could make them, the buttons darker. So now the characters have darker skin. What you would have to do though is, and I'm just going to go to one of these back here. What you would have to do is you would have to go in and edit the button, and you would find a picture of hungry and you would pick that symbol that you would want it to be different, like if it was in a different skin tone. So now I have those individual ones, but you would have to do that for each individual button. Okay, let's go through really quickly with hiding a button. You can see that when you're in edit mode, you can go into hide buttons, and then you have this option to hide all or show all. Okay, let me quickly just come home. Oops. So if I go into hide mode, and then I'm going to hide all. Hide mode can be great, except that because word power is predictive, it looks great if I just want those two buttons to show. But what I really have to do with hide mode is I have to go through all of the pages in the vocabulary to make sure that what I don't want to show isn't showing. So it's really a lot of work up front. But it can be useful in certain situations if you really felt that it was important to hide some of the buttons. Okay. And you know, hiding buttons, right? If we only have two buttons, it's just going to take us a long time to teach all of that vocabulary that is also there. So there are reasons to hide it. Sometimes you might want to hide it, you know, if you were going into a speech therapy session or something like that, and you really wanted to focus on just a few words. Okay. Okay, we don't have time for the tour today because we are 1 minute over. We will have time tomorrow to talk about the tour and some of the things that we have available and supports. So, any other questions today? I'm going to hang out. Thanks for that skin tone question. It was one that I haven't recently gotten or haven't gotten since it's a recent feature, but that was a really great question. If something comes to you, here's my contact information. Feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to answer any questions that come to you later on today. If not, please join us tomorrow for part 2. We're going to talk about more, like I said, of working with pages and how we customize vocabulary in different ways. And we'll be able to explore some of the resources that we have available. Just a quick reminder, if you are an ASHA SLP, make sure that you are downloading the materials in the materials section and submit that ASHA participation form to us within 15 days so that we can get it submitted to ASHA for you. And don't forget, in that email on your subject line, please include the date of today's training and the title. So you're going to say Customizing Your Chat Device Part 1, August 25th. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm going to hang out for just a few more seconds. But thank you all so much for all of your time today. Thank you for your great questions. And if you're registered for tomorrow's training, I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.